Hallam Foe by Peter Jinks. 1. Up in the oak tree, below the angled roof of the tree house, the telescope swung smoothly before returning to its original position. Behind the long fingers guiding the telescope's shaft, soft breathing was just audible. Alongside the clatter of leaves and the slap of some loose plastic sheeting, sunshine emerged from behind a cloud and cast a long rectangle of light over the hunched figure from whose coat hanger shoulders a camouflage jacket sagged. A large ring of keys and several rumpled handkerchiefs poked out of one of the bulging pockets. The intimate fug of bark and sap made the wooden cabin's interior seem stuffy despite the choppy breeze. With one eye pressed to the telescope's viewing lens, Hallam Foe's face was mostly hidden behind twin curtains of thick brown hair, although the other eye, open but temporarily unseeing, was caught in the leaf-filtered light and shown to be gray. His plim-soled feet were muscular, like a ballet dancer's, and scuffed brown along the instep. They shifted with the mounting excitement. He let out a harsh little cough, more like a hiccup, and pulled back. Pale bristles on the chin of his long white face confirmed that he was well past the age generally associated with playing in the tree houses. But Hallam wasn't playing, he was observing. The place was Leicestershire, in the geographical valley of England. The precise location, Shanby Hall, up the Black Lake, in the center of the network of lookouts and listening posts. Platform 1, lower point, southwest traverse, gatewatch. The lookout spread across 30 acres of trees, lawns, obscured paths, and patches of meadow. The lens of the telescope blinked once against the sky. Hallam meshed his nose with the palm of his hand, a nervous gesture that caused the cartilage to click noisily. Then he reached out without needing to look for a curly yellow log book that sat upon a pile of hardbacks, the top entitled British Birds and How to Identify Them. In the logbook, he marked the time down and began to scratch an entry in swaying, wildly jaundiced hand. 3:32. It looks like they are beginning courtship. They'd expected soon, not before time, this being midsummer. A loud, urgent bird cry came up through the trees. The warning was unnecessary. Hallam had already been marking their progress, guided by the quietness and occasional twittering disturbances in the canopy that preceded someone's walk through the lakeland. He put aside his logbook and went back to the telescope. Through it he saw Carl's head appear over the grassy bank. Carl was the gardener, a muscular man in his early 20s with cropped sandy hair. He paused at the top of the incline and looked back. To his side came a girl. It was Jenny. Hallam didn't need to check his logbook. She was from 36 Bottleworth Avenue, which backed onto a strand of conifers at the east edge of the hall grounds in the modern part of the village over the hill. On weekdays, she would retire to her bedroom around 11:45, usually undressed with the curtains open, having turned out the light, open the window, and lean out and smoke a cigarette. At the end of her smoke, she performed a private custom that still impressed even the seasoned preserver of unwatched behavior like Hallam. She would turn round her head, arch her back, and face the stars, and vertically propel a chunk of phlegm into the air, with the aim of catching it again in her mouth. Even in daylight, it was a feat. To Hallam's mute applause, she often succeeded, and he would mark it down with the tick of a margin of his logbook. Hallam's records also confirmed more salacious, but to him less interesting phenomena. For instance, that Jenny had slept with 4 men for the village in the last 2 months, with a couple of other possibilities in the nearby village of Seaby. Because she lived with her parents, her preferred location, along with several of the villagers' teenagers, was a spot off a little-used public right-of-way in a meadow which flanked the far borders of the grounds. The little condom-strewn nest was sheltered by brambles, but was observable from Laurel Point. Pairings would often visit around an hour before the nearby pub's closing time, presumably to avoid the encouragement of drinkers piling home. Policy was making a bid to be number 5. Hallam's grimace of concentration was widened to a grin, but only for a second. He pushed his head out of the slit, arranged his bony fingers in his mouth, and drew breath to make the answering call that would declare his presence, but then he paused and withdrew his head without a sound, not bothering to return to the telescope just yet. Hallam saw Carl wait for Jenny to catch up. She must have stepped in something. He was wiping a stack of heel with a wad of grass. Carl offered her a hand, which she accepted, and then together they walked to the edge of the lake. Hallam jumped up, and in one surprisingly feline move, slipped out of the window and onto the roof. He trotted along a thick bough with a bandy-legged gait that seemed to leave his upper body immobile. He held an arm loosely above him where a rope was slung. His feet aimed outwards, curled unerringly round the branch, and seemed to have their own knowledge of the precarious route abroad. Because Hallam's eyes were mostly fixed on the couple, he gripped the rope with both hands and heaved his legs and looked his ankles round. Swinging easily under the rope, hand over hand, he swiftly crossed the gap between the oak and the horse chestnut that stood at the top of the lake. Safe on the other tree, he took out and held ready a pair of cheap and lamentably weak binoculars, but concentrated first on listening. He was perfectly positioned. From this transmission point he could hear almost everything the two distant figures said as their voices bounced off the sleek water's surface. "It's 10 years since I've been here," said Jenny. "Noticing any changes?" With an earnest expression she surveyed the trees flickering in the wind and the shifting crops beyond. "Not really, but I remember it being more interesting on glue." He laughed her with affectionate sarcasm. "Bostic nostalgia, spare me, please." Jenny frowned and looked at her feet. "I shouldn't have worn these shoes. I wish you'd said." "Don't you like it up here?" he asked, anxious. "That depends." Jenny swung a leg languidly and waited. Flirtation wasn't Carl's strong point. He stood there uncertainly and then fired a nervous glance over her face, looking for guidance, but by then she was smiling out over the lake, carefully unconcerned, having attempted to decipher these worrying messages. Carl, it seemed, made an executive decision and courageously ducked in for a kiss, but did so clumsily, and their foreheads bumped. She cracked up laughing and had to step back with a sheepish grin. "Yeah, that's better," she said. Hallam shook his head and wondered what women saw in these pitiful displays of gauchness, especially in someone in Carl's admittedly camouflaged intelligence. This was the first time that Hallam had seen Carl meaningfully in the company of a woman. It was perhaps no coincidence that his chosen mate was the person who had been awarded the moniker of village slapper with only mild affection. Carl really ought to get out more, Hallam reflected loftily, enjoying the observer's freedom from equal judgment. However, Hallam did concede that Carl brought out reserves of tenderness in Ginny that he had not noticed in her other couplings, outdoors or in windows. Taking pity on Carl, Ginny looked her harm and his and pulled him close to her side, and together they looked over the sadly unromantic green-brown surface of the lake in silence. It seemed that Carl had become tongue-tied. Ginny sighed, then she sighed again, louder this time, displaying what might have been impatience or longing. Either way, Carl took the hint, attempting a slower, even more agonizing lunge than the first time. He lit over and their lips met and locked. They stayed that way for a long time. It was too far away to be sure, but with the aid of the binoculars, Hallam could see just the shadow of Carl's amateur tongue shifting inside her cheek. Hallam took it a moment to make an entry. 3:44, doing the busy maggot. The two lovers disengaged. After 1 minute and 25 seconds, according to Hallam's measurement, they started to walk with Carl leading her by the hand. Hallam returned to center point, only a light shaking of leaves betraying his passage from the outside canopy. From the side window, Hallam saw Carl come out the way to the side of the lake. Ginny liked the look of the beech tree, which anchored the higher reaches of the oak with a taut stretch of thick wire. The wire was looped around the beech's base and rose about 35 degrees from the horizontal, the bark protected by a wad of synthetic padding. Carl was less keen. "Further up," he suggested. "I like it here," she said, a mite petulantly, and sat down on the thick grass. Knowing that he was unlikely to argue, Carl took the opportunity to shoot a glance up at the treehouse, but Hallam had already anticipated him and was standing at the back of the cabin out of sight. It was a clear betrayal of trust, but what the H? "What's that wire for, then?" asked Jenny. "It's to keep up the oak. See the cracks at the base?" Carl settled himself next to her and drew an arm over his shoulder, satisfied that Hallam was not up there. "Where? I'll show you later." Recovering his confidence, Carl reached across and grabbed Jenny's left buttock and then swiveled her around and laid her down. Her giggle was quickly muffled as, lips slipping and sliding, they rolled away from the base of the beach and down the thicket bed of the wind-blown wild grass and long green blades, silvery pale underneath. Almost immediately, Carl's hand froze open inside her top. This she allowed without protest. But slowly Hallam saw her eyes open and look up towards the oak. Jenny continued to stare as Carl gingerly held her left breast with a degree of curiosity that strongly suggested his previous refusal to talk about women had less to do with honor than raw inexperience. Hallam was unfazed by Jenny's direct upward gaze. He was used to invisibility and was already acquainted with most of the tricks. From her perspective, with the sun in her eyes, he knew all you could see from center point through the foliage was a large black bob clinging to the trunk, more like enormous growth than something man-made. Carl began to rub himself against her hip with movements reminiscent of a neighbor's beagle, Raymond, until Johnny spoke again. "What's that up there?" "What?" "That big thing on the tree." "Eh?" Carl was irritated by the interruption. "Oh, that old tree house. Does anyone use it?" "No, it's shot through with rot." Hallam's eyebrows rose. Carl had lied with uncharacteristic fluency. Sex seemed to bring out the brigand in everyone. It was a son to play with when he was younger. His father built an old frozen architect. He even put a shower in it at one point, made from an old Victorian toilet cistern, hung it on the next door branch till the gale broke it off. He's strange, that young one. Hallam, he's all right. Jenny gave Carl a look of superstitious mistrust. Carl laughed. Okay, so maybe he is a bit peculiar. Up in the dark, stock still, Hallam gave out a minute puff of exasperation. Carl pulled Jenny close to him, and she sat up and plucked at her bra, unsettled by the mere idea of being watched, and reached into her handbag for cigarettes. She smiled at Carl's frustrated expression. Put a knot in it, you'll last longer. Jenny sparked up a lighter, and then Hallam heard the electric click of it and blew out smoke. She looked around her while Carl grumpily adjusted himself. Still got a funny atmosphere, this place. It's old. We used to come here on dares after dark when we were kids. You always felt you were being watched. Trish said it was haunted. Carl wearily turned back to the conversation mode. These lakes were dug during the plague, Jen, that's why. What a drag. This glide remark was made a mistake on Jenny's part, as it gave Carl prompts to plunge into village history, an opportunity rarely passed over even at a time like this. Well, back in the 1300s, whole villages were getting wiped out by the plague, and they thought it was poisoned water spreading the illness. The truth was, nobody had a clue but the landowners. It was a religious order back then, the Knights Templar. A bit like Masons had to do something or they'd be powerless, so they organized the digging on the lookout for a clean water supply, led the old owner of the hall whose tomb is in the church, so you can see the church spire all lined up with the lake. Judy exhaled smoke heavily and leaned toward the lake to look. Betraying all the mild interest, clutching her knees, Hallam too gazed up at the spire. Set on crumbling sandstone masonry, as he must have done 1,000 times before. Sure enough, the spire was perfectly aligned, poking up over the shrubs, 1/4 of a mile away, if it could be called a spire. It was leveled off halfway up, truncated with a weather vane stuck on the top like a comic afterthought. Carl continued with gathering enthusiasm, fired as always by the distant past. So they dug this lake, kept breathing the virus over each other, and that's why the spire's so short. Most of the able-bodied men died off. There was no one to finish it. Meanwhile, the lake got used to breed trout for the hall table. Just imagine it, the whole village fading away except a few terrified peasants, people like you and me, praying and digging away into their own graves. Shut up, you. Jenny landed Carl a surprisingly hard punch in the ribs. He rolled over, groaning and laughing. I hate ghost stories. Come on, you must have heard this stuff before. I'm not interested in that old crap. Look to the future, that's what I say. Carl suppressed a squawk of indignation because even he realized that now was not the time to argue about the relevance or otherwise of medieval history. He risked moving back closer and having a squeeze of her shoulder. She didn't shrug him off, but she was not ready to lie back down just yet. So it's your job to keep outlaws like us out of the grounds, is it? I let you in, didn't I? She didn't seem suppressed, so Carl took his hand off her and lay back, staring up at the sky, playing it patient. Jen took another drag, eyes half closed, looking straight ahead now, but nowhere in particular. Sure enough, she softened after a few quiet seconds, giving him a little dry, sideways look. So is abduction off the menu now? Her gaze moved down to between his legs, and Hallam felt a little burst of excitement in the pit of his stomach. Carl patted the grass next to him. Come here. Jenny smiled coaxingly, lifted her hand to flick the fag butt away over the water. No, suddenly Carl was grabbing at her for her arm, but he was too late. The half-smoked butt fluttered out 10 feet or so over the water before dropping with a damp sizzle. Small ripples marked the spot. A muscle in Hallam's jaw shifted slightly. Jenny was taken aback. What's got into you? You shouldn't have done that. What, thrown your fag into the lake? Why not? He doesn't like it. Who doesn't like it? Carl knew he had to lie. My boss. The boss didn't see it, though, did he? He's not here, is he? Jenny's scowl intensified when Carl failed to reply. She began to collect herself together. Prick, she said with conviction. Come on, Jen, I'm sorry. It's just he's got a thing about cigarette butts floating on the lake. You weren't to know. I didn't mean to snap. Don't go. Jenny was getting up, straightening her skirt. She humped, still out. Carl smiled hopefully. And tentatively reached up a hand to tug her little finger. Damage limitation. Hallam could see the affectionate gesture doing its work. Carl got onto his knees. His breath back. Jen, he cried. Come back here, Jen. I didn't know. She was gone. Carl hitched up scrambled to his knees and faced Hallam, who flopped onto his back again, looking up at the sky, laughing soundlessly. I tried to stop her, said Carl. You saw it, didn't you? Hallam sat up effortlessly and frowned at Carl. I'm terribly sorry. Did I interrupt something? He slowly grinned. Carl looked relieved, but swiftly turned to anger. He batted Hallam quite hard around the head. Hey, said Hallam mildly. You've ruined that for me now. Hallam's smile faded, but you could see his friend was upset. Aren't you impressed? That was a precision landing. The beginnings of a smile moved across Carl's lips, but he dislodged it with an irritated movement of his knuckles. You call that a joke, you little pervert? What were you doing spying on me? Hallam shrugged and inspected a graze on his elbow. Get your own bloody thrills, shouted Carl. What are you, nearly 18? 17, Carl. Carl got up and walked away, buckling his jeans as he went. That'll be right around the village within the day. She won't talk, Carl. She'll sound like a right slapper if she does. Carl swung around and struggled to contain himself. She's not a slapper. Well, not to you, get it? Not really, said Hallam with an inappropriate honesty. Carl was going to retort, but instead scowled and turned away to hitch up his zipper and signed thoughtfully as he put his hand in the warm, silvery shadow of flattened grass in the couple had left. He felt an unusual pang of loneliness and decided to return to the treehouse. He climbed up the rope later on the far side of the trunk. Back inside, he heard the mini tractor engine start up. Soon from his elevation, he saw Carl moving away back towards the drive. The trailer, which Carl was supposed to have been emptying of grass cuttings, left behind it a residual scattering of green confetti. The rattle of its metal hinges could be heard, even at this distance, as it bumped over the rough ground. Hallam leant his chin up on the lip of the treehouse's slit, glum but content. He enjoyed reassuring dusty smell of old wood baking in the heat. Beneath him stretched an expanse of hip-high wild grass, several fruitless fruit trees, and a collapsed line of fence, gray from age and rot. At a higher elevation, the upper branches of a great many trees could be seen, chestnuts, silver birches, more oaks, and among them just visible the white balustrade of the hall. The rest was obscured by long red brick and stable block. His reverie was interrupted by the whine of a highly revved car from down the slope. Then he saw confirmation of the red stripe of a car cruising up the near entrance track. Lucy, his sister. Hallam noted his clocking off time 4:02, snatched shut the logbook, and dropped it along with the other books into a sealable plastic bag. He rubbed at his face with makeup remover and put on his shirt again. He slipped over the telescope and replaced it in a chest to keep the darkened corner of the cabin. The books and the binoculars went on top, along with the badger pelt. He locked the chest with a separate key, slid back the window slats and bolted them, and stepped outside, snapping the padlock shut behind him. 2. Hallam walked into the kitchen and found Lucy standing at the stove, stirring the contents of a pan while impatiently smoking a cigarette. Hello, he said, like in the drained voice he tended to use after a day in the trees. Lucy jumped and turned and rolled her eyes. You're a sneaky one. Hallam flicked through the interiors of the magazine that was on a table, while she scraped the contents of the pan with a spatula, not hiding her disregard for the contents within. What's that you're cooking? Asked Hallam, sloping over and taking a cautious sniff in the honey-colored viscous substance. You've outdone yourself there, Lucy. It smells quite unlike food at all. That's because it's wax. Oh, dense one, she replied, and took a deep drag of her cigarette. What are you doing to your legs? Sorry, what? You're doing your legs? Asked Hallam, with a mild surprise. Lucy's voice acquired a hard edge. Not mine, hers, and she nodded up at the ceiling, indicating the master bedroom. Hallam nodded with studious lack of curiosity, lifted his backside into the work surface, and proceeded to hang a cambered door irritatingly with his heel. Lucy shot him a dry look, gave the wax one last stir, passed the remains of her cigarette to Hallam, and turned off the gas. Where's Julius? He asked. The door to his father's offices were open. He had seen only the secretary, Nicola, through the door on his way in. He's away at a meeting. We're seeing them at the restaurant later. You'd better make yourself beautiful, she added sarcastically, for the big occasion. Her tone was noted. It might suggest that a campaign of passive resistance against her stepmother had been redeclared after a long recess. Hallam narrowed his eyes and took a puff of her stub before tossing it into the sink. He thought Lucy would approve of the inconsiderate gesture. She'll blame me for that, she said. He took the slightly steaming pan out towards the door. I don't know why she asks me to do this. It's disgusting, too personal. Why can't she do it? Asked Hallam, retrieving the butt of the roll of her eyes. He followed her over the wooden floorboards of the corridor, skirting the step-ladders and dust sheets. She can't inflict pain on herself, she says, but my guess is she thinks I enjoy these intimate moments together. Lucy's voice dropped as they went up the stairs. She's wallowing in her bath at the moment, hippo-like. I feel like her. Effing skivvy. Hallam remembered once upon a time not so long ago when Lucy had enjoyed spending time with her evil stepmother, so much, in fact, that Verity would visit her in Cambridge while Julius buried himself in work. But Hallam did not question this outbreak of resentment. They were stepchildren. Conflicts came and went. They reached the top of the broad main staircase and turned left on a long landing, moving past peeling strips of brownish wallpaper that had been their real mother's admittedly suspect but calming choice. It was now in the process of being steamed off in preparation for the new start, which was pronounced, according to Verity, in slightly arch, over-emphatic manner of country house dweller. At the end of the landing they came to 4 more steps, where a shut door led to the right, the master bedroom. Hallam paused near the invisible barrier, and Lucy carried on, shouldering the door wide open, but pausing briefly in the doorway. I won't be long. Hallam turned as if to return the way he had come, but when he was sure that Lucy had entered the bathroom, when he stopped and softly climbed the steps, he could hear a murmured voice at the slop of the bathwater. Lucy had left the door agape, and Hallam popped his head through far enough to confirm that full-length mirror at the end of the room did indeed give him a limited view into the bathroom. This was not fortuitous. He regularly toured the hall, checking his viewing points, making small adjustments where needed, although this one was seldom used. He was assisted in his view by the mirror-doored cupboards of the bathroom that faced each other, one of which was half open and provided a collision of slightly steam-spoiled images. Lucy was on her knees scraping the edge of the spatula on the rim of the pan, while in front of her a long pink leg emerged from a white toweling robe, twinkling its immaculate toes. A series of reflected pink legs crisscrossed into infinity. Verity's upper body and face were not visible as she was leaning back, Cleopatra-like, on the chair, while Lucy applied the hot wax to her flesh. In the brief silence, Hallam could hear the gurgle of bathwater on its piped descent. The Hall of Mirrors, he thought. You must be getting excited about the move, said Verity, her voice fuzzy with pleasure. Lucy was leaving for South Africa at the end of the week for an ethically questionable job at De Beers. Do you want a hand with the packing? No thanks, said Lucy, shuffling across her knees to the next leg that swung into view. It's mostly disposal anyway. I admire you traveling light, always at up with loads. A pause of spatula made its honey-colored trail up towards the knee. I expect you'll miss your friends, she added. Lucy grunted, not as much as you think. Have you heard anything from Alex? Alex, Hallam vaguely recalled, was a friend of Lucy's from the university, though he had not heard the name mentioned for a while. No, Lucy replied, then paused and dropped the spatula back into the pan with a clatter. Have you? There was a hint of suppressed aggression in her voice. Not really. Another silence as the legs moved out of sight and the toweling robe was pulled down off the shoulders to the waist as far as Hallam could tell. Lucy pursed her lips and stood up. The bathroom door creaked forward a few inches, perhaps closed slightly to reduce the draught. It destroyed Hallam's view, so he made himself more comfortable on the floor and concentrated on listening. Has Hallam shown any kind of interest in a career? Asked Verity. I was thinking, now that we've got you set up, we could arrange some work experience for him in the university holidays. Hallam cringed and resisted the urge to steal away. He hated hearing conversations about himself. They always talked about Hallam that was weak and quiet, going through adolescent difficulty. He only endured hearing about his public persona because it served as an advanced warning against threats to his private and currently bucolic world. Verity's question caused his skin to tingle with fright, as did any suggestion that aimed to lever him out of the grounds. Well, actually, began Lucy, I've got a feeling that he might follow in Julius's footsteps and become an architect. In fact, she continued breezily, as Hallam choked on the outrageous fabrication, after a few years in diamonds, I might get involved too on the business side, of course. I quite enjoyed looking after things when you were away. She was referring to the months after their mother had killed herself, when Julius sank into depression, and Verity, technically working in the office as an accountant/PA, had taken to extended leave of absence. There was a silence broken only by the soft scrape of the spatula on the rim of the pan. Is that a good idea? Verity asked quietly, with the voice that had refocused. Why not? I saw what meant missing for those accounts, even if your father didn't. What? I also know what you spent it on. Your stuff I know, too. I know, but I don't think you really want to do that. Not when you've got a lovely job to go to and plenty of help with the bills if you're good. Do you think it's dried yet? A pause. A few more minutes, said Lucy, humbled. The time passed in silence. Now do it quickly. Remember, said Verity at last, her voice already tightening in anticipation, it's the pain speaking. He heard two long and vicious rips, so close together they almost combined. A ferociously nipped intake of breath. You did that slowly on purpose, you little whore. A lopsided grin of disbelief formed on Hallam's face. There was a silence followed by soft, measured pants. Now the rest, Verity said in a husky, reproachful voice. Another shorter, dual-ripping sound was heard, and a lack of even yelp caused Hallam's knuckles to flex white, then red. At last there was a deep laugh of utter abandonment. You have shown yourself to be highly ungrateful, Lucy. I won't forget it. He went and peered back through the door into the mirror. He saw Lucy chucking something into a plastic bag, grabbing the pan and getting up. Hallam quickly trotted back down the corridor, but it was close enough to hear Verity, her normal tone restored, calling out, Lucy, please come back. But Lucy was out through the door, tears rimming in her eyes, as Hallam pretended to be emerging from his bedroom. That's the last time, so help me God, she declared fervently. She paused at the top of the stairs, breathing deeply, and then with a gesture of irritation shoved the plastic bag and pan into Hallam's hands before stamping downstairs. Hallam peered into the bag and saw long curled strips of leg wax, with short black hair stuck to them. He started to follow Lucy down the stairs, fishing in the bag and pulling one out of two smaller strips of different pattern of longer hairs. They reminded him strangely of pork scratchings. Hold on, he said, a look of wonder on his face. What about these ones? She glanced back. Bikini line. Hallam affected a look of horror and dropped them back into the bag. before wiping his hands on his trousers. Lucy did that? Lucy laughed, sniffed, and pushed open the green baize door that led back through the kitchen. Her armpits, you dolt. There was time to kill before their date with Julius and Verity. Lucy and Hallam headed for the army surplus shop in the city center. They strolled past a group of teenagers gathered round a glass case bewitched by combat knives displayed within. Hallam regarded them with curiosity as he and Lucy went to the counter where a large round man sat precariously on a high stool. "Excuse me, do you have any mosquito netting?" asked Lucy. The man pointed up at the ceiling from where various nets hung. "Water purifying tablets?" "Lucy," Hallam interrupted, "you're going to live on Johannesburg." Verity said, "You'd better off taking a mobile phone and a machine gun." "What does that silly dog know? She probably never stuck her nose out the 5-star hotel." She looked at the man again. "That reminds me, do you have a Garrett's cheese wire at the back?" "I don't think she was being rude," Hallam remarked for the sake of accuracy. They made their way through the deodorized smog of Saturday shoppers in the city center. Lucy carried a bulging green duffel bag of tropical traveling unnecessaries. Her mood seemed to have lifted. "Will you miss me when I'm gone?" She smiled and looked at her little brother. Taking his confused expression, Hallam knew his shyness. In fact, it was a more difficult question than she realized, because he missed her already. He had noted with growing reproach her long absences since her graduation, her distantness when she was around, but the pangs of impending abandonment did nothing to reduce the orchestral love that he felt for her. He was trying to think of an answer that would be honest without sounding hurtful when she peered closer. "Is that makeup on your face? Did you borrow some?" Actually, it was their mother's, salvaged from her personal effects shortly after her death. This was a sensitive matter, one that she did not wish to talk about. He wiped his cheeks rapidly. He had tried to get most of the foundation off earlier, but his cheeks were still glossy. "You look very glamorous." "Shut up," said Hallam. They walked in silence for a while, and as the crowds began to clear, Hallam's mind hovered around the conversation he had heard in the bathroom, most of which he had not properly understood. All that he really knew was that over the course of the past 4 years, he and Lucy, despite the many reasons to hate their stepmother, had fallen for her instead, until now. Now it seemed that Lucy was beginning to hate in the mature way of adults. Hallam had not yet graduated from sporadic personal resentment. Part of the difficulty for Verity's selective thoughtfulness. She had, for instance, arranged the De Beers job for Lucy. What's more, she seemed to respect solitary nature. All she asked in return was acceptance of her irksome, if seemingly well-meaning, attempts to slot him through into the slonier end of the county circuit. It was different with Lucy. Verity had seemed determined to force intimacy on her, confused and vaguely flattered, being taken into this other woman's confidence. There was 15 years between them. Lucy responded either with strained cordiality when Hallam was around, or he suspected getting confessions of her own when he was not. On the whole, he tried not to spy on Lucy, partly out of respect, but also because he liked to think that it wasn't necessary. He and his sister were close, he told himself, at least in a roundabout way. Lucy gamely booted a tin can off the pavement to break the silence and cleared her throat. "Is there something you want to talk about? I'm very open-minded." "Lucy," he said patiently, realizing that she must still be thinking about the makeup, "I am not gay." "Oh," she went for an option too. "Your exam results are due soon, aren't they? Worried?" He had not even thought about them. "You'll be fine, won't you?" said Lucy, trying to reassure him. "You love university. It will get you out of the hall anyway, away from the hag." Hallam's face and mind went blank. The future held no allure for him, and his exam results were the least of his worries, his teachers being assured him of straight A's. In practical terms, however, he was comprehensively ignorant of the adult world outside of grounds, and he wished desperately to preserve this state of affairs for as long as he could. He could sense a growing threat to territory he guarded on his mother's behalf. He had loved the grounds to distraction, and it frightened him so much that he found elaborate ways not to think about it. He stepped carefully round a dog turd on the pavement. Up ahead was a litter bin, piled high with empty cans and styrofoam chip containers, haloed by circling wasps. In the sunshine, it gave off the smell of sweetened orange juice and chip shop vinegar. Lucy stretched her arm and moved on to a happier subject. "I've got a feeling that I'm not going to see Verity ever again," she said, but then the small, responsible frown appeared. "Although if she dies, I may come back for the formalities, read an exorcism, place a stake through her heart, etc." "What's the matter with you two, anyway?" "Never you mind." "No, what is it?" Girly things, Wooms. Hallam grunted and looked up as they turned the corner. Ahead, a group of 4 teenage young men in assorted tracksuits and baggy buttonless jeans lounged on the bench, smoking cigarettes. They were also conducting a gobbering contest, the aim of which was to send phlegm through the legs of the passing pedestrians. One of them, a short one with an aspiring mustache, received a muted cheer as his yellow missile flashed handsomely between the shins of a schoolboy. Then he noticed Lucy. Faces pointed in their direction. Leers followed, and a few whispered comments as they approached. Hallam and Marks and Spencer's tweed and uncomfortably hot gray flannels stared downwards. The pavement ahead was speckled with saliva. It made him think of the cuckoo spit he sometimes found on the hedgerows in Hall. "But I'm determined to enjoy myself this evening," Lucy said in reckless, sing-song tones, swinging her ragged green duffled bag from one shoulder to the other. Whatever they're celebrating, the corner of her bag clipped the tip of one of the group's cigarettes, and sparks fluttered to the ground. The mustachioed young man looked down in disbelief at the embers of a cigarette, smoking like a tiny earthed comet on the pavement slab. A few shreds of tobacco were still attached. "Watch it, you silly cow," he said in a tone of righteous annoyance. "Oh, sod off," she sighed, not turning her head. Then to Hallam, casually, "I've had enough of being insulted today. Is my bag on fire?" "What did she say?" Hallam heard the mustache say to him and his friends. Then the stranger raised his voice to Lucy. "What was that you said?" Hallam felt the unfamiliar role of masculine protector fall across his skinny shoulders. He took Lucy's elbow to guide her onwards, and felt a sharp desire to be up a tree. "Sorry," he said, gruffly over his shoulder, on her behalf. "Come here and say that," one of them said. There was laughter, and they seemed to lose interest. Hallam felt Lucy slowing down. "Lucy, we haven't got time for a fight," he said quickly. "Thanks for the advice, Hallam," she said, and then stopped, smiled helpfully towards the mustache, and raised her voice. "He said sorry. I said sod off. Is everything clear now? Good day." The mustache frowned at the cheek of it, but was unable to think of an immediate response. His nearest companion, wearing a tight 70s-style t-shirt and shaggy hair, suppressed a grin. He had a small gap between his front teeth. Then this mustache peered at Hallam. "Wait, does that make up? Come here." Hallam turned back, and the young man approached. Now it was Lucy dragging Hallam away. "Hallam, don't bother," but it was no use. In the key to the confrontation, Hallam had discovered a hidden talent for unthinking obedience. It was not cowardice, he later told himself, but something more primordially stupid. The mustache came up to him, waving aftershave, and peered closer at Hallam's face. "Leave it. See," said the toot one behind him, sounding bored. Hallam rubbed furiously at the residual foundation on his cheeks and continued rubbing until he found himself magically lying on his back on the pavement, looking up the nostrils of his adversary. "See," it seemed, had hit him. How strange. In the ladies' toilet of the Barkham Hotel, Lucy dabbed Hallam's cut lip with the damp cotton wool and wiped the blood that had dribbled down his chin and dried. "You're lucky it just clipped you," she murmured solicitously. "There, it's not swelling too much. If I were you, I'd get the rest of that makeup off. Here's some remover." "Thank you so much," said Hallam, with what he felt was an appropriate level of sarcasm. He glanced nervously toward the door, worried that more females might come in and offer group sympathy. He felt exposed in this formidable zone of female privacy, having been accorded temporary eunuch status by a sympathetic lady at reception. "Now don't be grumpy," Lucy turned to address her own face as Hallam took some cotton wool and started rubbing his face with makeup remover. Even in the ugly light of the bathroom mirror, Lucy's skin looked smooth and unblemished, its light tan softening the lines of her small nose and slightly scented brown eyes. Hallam paused and looked at his own lip. Their own reflection, not something he enjoyed doing at the best of times. His lip was puffing, and it gave him a mild pout, concrete evidence that any attempt to participate in the world outside grounds was bound for humiliation. He had evolved in a highly specialized environment. Outside, he was a runt. Lucy opened her duffel bag and pulled out some lipstick and then a rolled-up black dress. There was a little surprise in the right-hand pocket. She unraveled the dress and, with a smile at Hallam, waltzed into one of the cubicles. Her t-shirt, white with red heart in the center, flopped over the cubicle door. Hallam searched the duffel bag. Inside was a mini joint, daintily rolled. "Go in next door and light it up," she said through the door. Her trousers swung over next. He could see her bare feet and gold ankle bracelet underneath the door, the toenails painted green. In the same pocket he found a lighter. Hallam stepped onto the cubicle beside her and lit the joint. The tobacco crackled slightly and had a sharp taste. With a slight shudder he took a second drag. Over the top of the partition he saw the black dress pass over the bare white arms. Hallam reached up to give Lucy the joint. She took it, and the cloud of smoke began to creep along the low ceiling, then leaked out over the top of the cubicle. There was a short hiss as the joint was dropped into the toilet, and the smoke's curiously fascinating effect was destroyed as the door opened and Lucy emerged. Hallam did also. She critically assessed herself in the mirror. She applied lip gloss. Hallam could feel hot blood circulating his ears. Lucy briefly appeared two-dimensional. "All done," she smiled, tossing the lipstick into the bag. "We're early. Then we must build up the tab for Julius." Lucy had recently begun to call their father by his first name. Hallam wondered whether it was a statement of equality now that she had a job, or just a snub, placing him in the same category as Verity, as if marrying the woman he had lost the privilege of fatherhood. Hallam felt too self-conscious to follow Lucy's suit except when they were alone together, so had compromised by not calling his father anything at all, which had its own practical difficulties. Lucy took one last glance in the mirror, rolled her lips, and with the air of someone trying out a new mouth, spoke one bright word: "Cocktails." Hallam and Lucy were into their second round of margaritas by the time they heard the sound emerging from the lobby of purchasing power, passing through an English hotel. It whispered, it burbled ingratiatingly, eventually it rustled. The lady behind the desk smiled in their direction, and a porter came through, carrying two ostentatiously small shopping bags. "There they come," muttered Lucy bitterly. The happy couple. Verity appeared in the doorway, dressed in black. She cradled in her arms a long, elegant cactus swaddled in florist paper. Tall, pale, spectacularly correct, she passed the prickly plant to the porter with a curt instruction not to water it, then turned to survey the room. She dropped a hand to her crocheted hip in an artful display of impatience. She straightened a silk-stockinged leg. Enter the hag, thought Hallam. He tried to pinpoint Verity's nodes of attractiveness, the slight tightness of the skin between her eyes that gave her face an almost oriental intensity, the playful of indifference with which she could look at a man. Then there were more obvious things also, for instance, the full-breasted trimness of her figure that made Hallam think of the 50s actresses. But more interesting was the way she seemed to hold that arresting figure together by force of will rather than exercise or diet. Verity was a consumer. She took undisguised pleasure in food, wine, and even occasionally Julius's cigars, and yet to Hallam's knowledge she never played sport or went to a gymnasium. He had seen many 30-something professional females, and particularly young architects, come through his father's office over the years, although recently the flow had mysteriously abated, and they had physiques variously tanned, toned, or starved. All of them worked on. Verity's body gave the different impression of having been attended to. Having witnessed the depilatory episode earlier in the day, Hallam now understood the true price of this seeming effortlessness. There was suffering at every curve, other people's mostly. Verity at last contrived to spot them, seeing their cocktail glasses. She raised an eyebrow knowingly, and for all their efforts, their faces rose with the tide of her conspiratorial charm, but Lucy fought it. As Verity took the shopping bags from the porter, Lucy whispered to Hallam, "Wearing that stuffy brooch again, I see. Jane Austen without the knickers." Verity arrived at the semicircular seating arrangement. She slipped the bags under the table and looked at Hallam, with rose to his feet. 2 kisses. "Hallam, you are becoming handsome." It was stated as cold fact. "You should be off shagging girls," suggested Lucy. "I'm on holiday," he parried, feeling himself flush nevertheless. Verity smiled and leant down to kiss Lucy, although this was difficult to maneuver as Lucy did not deign to move. Verity straightened and sat down, followed by Hallam. The waiter came over. "A Bloody Mary, please," said Verity, "and a bottle of Veuve Clicquot, 4 glasses." "Where's Julius?" asked Lucy, careful not to sound as if she gave a toss. "He is inspecting the car park. Did you see the cactus he gave me?" Verity moved her dark hair from left to right. The movement exposed a long, slim throat encircled by a blue ribbon, which held the 18th century brooch. one of Julius's bestowals from the Foe inheritance. She always wore it on significant occasions. Hallam's gaze surreptitiously lingered over Verity's hair. It was thick, dark, and immaculate. Hallam, there was an accusation in Lucy's voice. She had a sixth sense for detecting when Hallam was being lulled by Verity. Hallam quickly wiped the dreamy look off his face, blinked apologetically, and stared instead at the Persian rug beneath his feet, willing as shame to seep away into purple geometry. Shame because this was the power which had hopelessly outclassed and then destroyed their mother. Hallam knew that female mystery was extinct in the modern world, but Verity possessed something that came worryingly close, the timeless twin set of sex and death. "Here he comes," says Verity, without turning around. She had spotted her husband's arrival in the mirror on the far wall. Hallam noted approvingly. Julius rambled through the same entrance in a wrinkled dark blue suit, groping in his pockets for the same imaginary coins as he often did when he was bothered by something. He was a tall man in his late 40s with gray flecked hair, but the small nose made him look almost boyish. The impression was reinforced by his neglected appearance and teardrop-shaped brown eyes. They communicated a quality not unlike innocence, but which, on surviving into middle age, betrays itself as a highly resourceful form of escapism. So Hallam would conclude several years later. "Come and sit down," Verity said. "I don't know why they build them like that. It's a ridiculous waste of space." "Shut up, darling," she hinted. Two waiters arrived with the Bloody Mary and an ice bucket containing the champagne. Julius noticed and dragged his mind away from car parks. The architect smiled sheepishly. This was the first test of Lucy's resolution not to divulge in any form of emotional collaboration. There was silence. Hallam looked at Lucy, wanting guidance on how to play this. It was the first time they had been invited to celebrate this particular date in the calendar, but 4 years must have been judged long enough for old sensitivities to heal. Hallam could see Lucy wavering over whether to display sarcasm. "Happy anniversary, Julius," irony and grudging affection. Despite herself, Lucy had been charming. "Happy anniversary, da." Hallam had his usual problem with the form of address and pretended to cough. "So," said Verity, addressing her stepchildren with a look of playful disapproval, "the pair of you are about to be indulged." "But what with you going away overseas, Lucy? This might be the last time we have a proper family meal together for ages, right?" She groped for the shopping bags under the table, giving Lucy the opportunity to roll her eyes in a here-we-go manner at Hallam. Out came 2 gift-wrapped packages. Hallam took his hesitantly. Lucy swept hers up with one indifferent hand. Hallam's eyes widened as he pulled out of the wrapping pair Alicia binoculars. The best, they featured prominently in the well-thumbed spy captain brochures he pornographically coveted. He immediately lifted them up to his eyes and swept the room. They were marvelously powerful. He trained them on the blurred image of Verity and Julius, grinned, and thought all the better for watching you. Unfortunately, at this range, his subjects were too close for focus. "They're brilliant, thanks." Hallam lowered the binoculars, extremely pleased. Verity smiled and touched his knee. "A replacement for that ancient telescope. You'll be able to spot a grebe from a mile off now." They all looked then at Lucy. Her head was bowed. Nestled on her lap, in a bed of gift wrapping, was a mobile telephone. "You can use it for international calls," said Verity, "so you've no excuse not to call and give us your news." "You've got to keep it charged up," said Julius. "I've got an adapter you can use over there." Lucy did not look up. "Don't you like it?" asked Verity. "For some reason your father preferred buying this to paying for the tattoo you've been going on about, even if it was more expensive. Do you want us to take it back?" "No," said Lucy. She looked up at Verity with frank, moist eyes and a smile raw with shame. "I love it, as you well know." Julius grunted with satisfaction and took a swig from his flute of wine. Hallam frowned and weighed the binoculars in his hands. They were reassuringly heavy. Their table was in the far corner, lodged in the shag pile of the hotel's main dining room. Hallam noticed that things were going from bad to worse by the time the food was ordered.